The man in the black vest grabbed the 7-year-old girl by the arm and pressed the barrel of his rifle against her temple. Not to threaten, not to negotiate, just to watch the nurses freeze. He smiled. He actually smiled. Then he looked down the corridor and fired 2 shots into the ceiling and screamed for everyone to get on the floor. Patients, doctors, everyone. He wanted them terrified. He wanted them helpless. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that the woman in scrubs at the end of that hallway was not trembling. She was calculating. She was already 3 moves ahead, and she was not a nurse. Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let us go back to where it all began. The morning shift at Al Rashid Military Medical Center started the same way it always did, with the low hum of generators, the smell of antiseptic cutting through recycled air, and the sound of boots on linoleum floors, moving with that particular kind of urgency that belongs only to people who have seen too much and still keep showing up. Ava Castillo had been on her feet since 5 in the morning. She had been in Iraq for exactly 22 days. To most of the staff who passed her in the hallway, she was just the new one. Quiet, polite, efficient. She kept her dark hair pulled back tight, wore her scrubs without wrinkle, and answered every question the senior nurses threw at her with a calm that some of them mistook for inexperience and others mistook for indifference. Neither group was right. She was 29 years old and had a face that belonged in a different story. Soft features, dark eyes that caught the light in a way that made people feel, somehow, that she was listening even when she wasn't looking at them. The kind of face that made wounded soldiers relax a little when she walked into a room. The kind of face that made people underestimate her before she ever opened her mouth. She was checking IV lines in Ward C when Lieutenant Marcus Holt walked past the open doorway without stopping, the way SEALs tend to walk through hospitals, like the building is a temporary inconvenience and the real world is somewhere else entirely. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the jaw of a man who had been told no 100 times in his life and had never once accepted it. He led the 4-man SEAL security detail stationed at Al Rashid. Their job was threat assessment, perimeter integrity, and what the official paperwork called force protection. What it actually meant was that they were the last line between the people in those hospital beds and the people outside who wanted them dead. Holt had been briefed on all new personnel. He had read Ava's file, registered nurse, volunteer assignment, no combat background. He had not given her a second thought. He gave her a first thought now, though, only because she was the only person in the hallway who was moving slowly. Every other person on that floor was doing the normal morning shuffle, half awake, coffee in hand, minds already full of the day ahead. But Ava was standing completely still at the window at the end of the corridor, looking down at the front approach road with the kind of stillness that does not belong to someone who is daydreaming. Holt slowed without meaning to. He looked at her. Then he looked at what she was looking at. The road was clear, nothing unusual. He kept walking. He did not know that Ava had already counted 11 things wrong with the morning and was working on the 12th. The first thing she had noticed was the truck. It had been parked across the street from the hospital entrance since 6:42. Not unusual by itself, supply vehicles came and went on irregular schedules in this part of the city, but this one had not moved, and the engine had not turned over once in 40 minutes, and the 2 men sitting in the cab had not looked at each other, had not checked their phones, had not done any of the 100 small things that men waiting in a parked truck tend to do out of boredom. They were not bored. They were waiting. The second thing she had noticed was the rooftop across the street. There was a shadow there that had shifted twice in 20 minutes. Shadows do not shift unless something is moving them. And the angle of the morning sun meant the shadow belonged to something or someone low to the ground, moving in deliberate increments. She did not say anything to anyone. Not yet. She did not have enough, and she knew from hard experience that when you walk into a room full of men who have already assessed the situation and decided it is normal, you had better be certain before you open your mouth. Because if you are wrong, you do not get a second chance to be right. She finished checking the IV lines and went to find her next patient. 3 corridors away, in the SEAL team's temporary operations space, a converted supply room with a laptop, 2 radios, and a whiteboard covered in what looked like meaningless diagrams, but were not. Petty Officer First Class Danny Reyes was eating a protein bar and arguing with Petty Officer Second Class Chris Kowalski about whether the generator on the east side of the building was running louder than usual. "It always runs loud," Kowalski said without looking up from his screen. "It does not always run loud," Reyes said, already irritated. "It runs at a consistent level, and today it is running louder, which means something is pulling more power from the grid, which means something is drawing current that was not drawing current yesterday. Or it needs servicing. Or it needs servicing, yeah. Or something on this base is pulling power that should not be pulling power. Like, for example, a jammer." Kowalski finally looked up. The protein bar paused in midair between Reyes and his mouth. The 2 men looked at each other. "You want to call Holt?" Kowalski said. "I want to finish this protein bar," Reyes said. "Then I want to call Holt." He did not finish the protein bar. The explosion hit the front entrance of Al-Rashid Military Medical Center at 7:41 in the morning. The sound was enormous. Not the sharp crack of a firearm, but the deep, full-body concussion of a shaped charge. The kind of blast that does not just make noise, but makes the air itself move. The kind that people who have been near one before feel in their chest before they hear it in their ears. Ava heard it from Ward C. She had her hand on a saline bag, and the blast moved through the building like a wave, knocking a water glass off a bedside table, sending dust from the ceiling tiles drifting down in slow, terrible curtains. The patient in the bed, a young Army corporal named Tomas, who had lost 2 fingers to an IED 3 weeks ago, grabbed her wrist with his good hand and said, "What was that?" "Stay in the bed," she said. She said it the way you say a fact, not the way you say a request. She was already moving toward the door. The hallway outside Ward C had become a different place in the space of 4 seconds. Nurses were running. An orderly dropped a tray of medications and did not stop to pick them up. Someone down the hall was shouting for a doctor, and the word had taken on the wrong kind of urgency. Not the medical urgency Ava knew, but something older and more primitive. A door slammed somewhere below them, then another one, then a sound she recognized immediately, a sound that sent every nerve in her body to a place it had not been in 2 years. The percussive, unmistakable double crack of automatic weapon fire somewhere in the lower floors of the building. She went back into Ward C. She did not look panicked. She looked, Tomas would say later, like someone had finally told her what the meeting was actually about. "Listen to me carefully," she said to Tomas. She was already pulling her ID lanyard off and tucking it into her scrub pocket. "I need you to get out of that bed and get into the bathroom. Take your IV stand with you. Do not disconnect it. Lock the door. Do not open it unless you hear someone say your name and your full rank. Can you do that?" Tomas stared at her. He was 21 years old. "Are those gunshots?" "Yes, bathroom, now." She helped him up herself, guided him to the bathroom door with one hand and held the IV stand with the other, waited for the click of the lock, and then went to the cabinet on the wall above the supply counter. She used her key card to open it. Only nursing staff and senior medics had access, and she stood there for one moment looking at the contents, and anyone watching her face in that moment would have seen something clarify there. The way a road becomes clear when the fog lifts. She closed the cabinet. She moved into the hallway. Downstairs, it had already gone very bad very fast. Holt had heard the explosion from the operations room and had been moving toward the stairs before the echo finished rolling through the building. He had his sidearm out, his radio in his left hand, and Reyes and Kowalski behind him within 12 seconds of the blast. The fourth member of his team, Petty Officer Rodriguez, was already on the ground floor doing a morning equipment check and had immediately gone dark on comms, which was the worst possible information Holt could have had in that moment. The lobby of Al-Rashid was no longer a lobby. It was a point of entry. The front doors were gone. In their place was a hole in the wall, and through that hole came 6 armed men in black tactical vests, moving fast, moving with the kind of coordinated efficiency that told Holt immediately these were not amateurs. These were trained, these were planned, and they had been here before, at least in rehearsal. He reached the bottom of the second-floor stairwell and looked through the reinforced window in the fire door. What he saw stopped him for precisely 2 seconds, which is a very long time when lives are counting. Rodriguez was on the ground near the reception desk, not moving, and 2 of the 6 intruders were heading toward the patient wards, in a direction that told Holt they knew exactly where they were going. The other 4 had split, 2 going toward the pharmacy and records room, 2 holding the lobby as a choke point. These were not people here to rob supplies. They knew the layout. They had a target, possibly multiple targets, and they had the entrance. "Reyes," Holt said, his voice low and flat in the way that told everyone around him the thinking was done and the executing had begun. "Take Kowalski, go up to the 3rd floor, use the east stairwell to flank the 2 heading toward the wards. Do not engage until you have position. I will hold the 2nd floor access point." "Rodriguez is down," Reyes said. "I see him. Move." They moved, and Holt turned back to the door, watching, counting, waiting for the moment the geometry of the situation gave him an angle that would not get a patient killed. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that someone was already ahead of them. Ava had not gone toward the lobby. She had gone to the left, down the service corridor that ran parallel to the main patient wing, the one that maintenance staff used between shifts. Narrow and lit by single overhead fluorescents, smelling of cleaning solution and old pipe insulation. She had walked it twice in her first 3 days at Al-Rashid, the way she walked every space she entered, slowly, deliberately, counting turns, noting doors, filing it away. Old habit, hard habit, the kind of habit that had been burned into her, not by nursing school, but by something that came before it. She stopped at the junction where the service corridor met a cross passage leading toward the stairwell access panel on the north side of the building. She could hear them now, 2 of the intruders, moving through the main corridor on the other side of the wall from her, maybe 15 feet away. She could hear their footsteps, heavy, confident, not bothering to be quiet. Why would they? As far as they knew, the hospital was a building full of nurses and patients, and a handful of American security personnel who were already scrambling and behind. They were wrong. She moved to the access panel. She opened it, not with a key, but with a specific kind of pressure on the lower left corner that maintenance had never bothered to fix. She had found it on day 2. She slipped through and let the panel close behind her. And now she was in the stairwell. And now the 2 intruders were 1 floor below her. And now she was making decisions that had nothing to do with nursing and everything to do with the 7 years she had spent before nursing school in a role that the United States Marine Corps called a critical skills operator, and that everyone else called a sniper. The first intruder came through the stairwell door at the ground floor level looking up, which was the natural human instinct and also the wrong choice. Ava was already pressed into the landing alcove at the 2nd floor, above him, at an angle that gave her everything and him nothing. She watched him. He was scanning the stairwell with a tactical flashlight in his left hand and a compact submachine gun in his right. Good posture, controlled breathing, trained. But he was trained for a certain kind of opponent. He was not trained for her. She let him take 3 steps up the stairs. She needed him committed to the direction, away from the door and unable to retreat cleanly. She watched the way his weight shifted, the way his head moved, the way his gun hand tracked slowly up the stairwell wall. She had seen 100 men move exactly like this. She had made judgments about every single one of them. She moved. It was not a shot. There was no gun. What Ava did in that stairwell in the next 4 seconds was something that happens between people who have been trained in ways that most people never see and cannot quite believe afterward. Something efficient and terrible and over before it seemed possible for it to be over. The intruder's flashlight clattered down the stairs and went dark. His submachine gun followed. The silence that came after was the loudest kind. The second intruder was still on the ground floor, and he heard the sound of first one stopping. He called out in Arabic, a short word, a name maybe, a check-in. Nothing answered. He moved toward the stairwell door. Ava was already on the other side of it. When Holt reached the second-floor junction point 3 minutes after she had moved through the service corridor, he found the 2 intruders neutralized, one in the stairwell and one in the doorframe, and absolutely no indication of who had done it. No shell casings, no sign of a weapon, just 2 men who had been moving through a hospital killing people and who were now, permanently, not. He stood there for a full 4 seconds, which was longer than he had stood still since the explosion, and he said out loud to nobody, "What in the hell?" His radio crackled. Reyes, upstairs, clipped and urgent. "Holt, the 2 heading toward the wards, they're down, both of them. I did not take them. Kowalski did not take them. They were down when we got there." Holt's jaw worked. "How?" "I don't know. It looks like close quarters. But Holt, whoever did this, they used the intruder's own weapon on the second one. The shot angle is from above and to the north. If I'm reading this right, whoever did this was in the service corridor." The service corridor. The staff corridor. The one that nurses used. Holt's mind went back to the woman in the hallway that morning, standing still at the window, looking at something he had looked at and dismissed. He thought about her face, the way she had been watching the road, the way she had not been daydreaming. "Reyes," he said slowly, "where is the new nurse?" A pause, then Reyes came back on. "I don't know, she's not in the ward. Patient in Ward C says she put him in the bathroom and told him to lock the door before the shooting started." Before the shooting started. Holt was already moving. He found her 4 minutes later on the north end of the 3rd floor, in the intersection where the main corridor met the administration wing. She was standing with her back to the wall, looking at the corner, and she was holding a submachine gun that did not belong to her in a grip that told him everything he needed to know about her relationship with submachine guns. She did not turn around when she heard him approaching. She said, without raising her voice, "There are 2 more. Administration wing. They went left at the junction, which means they're heading toward the records room, or they already have what they came for, and they are trying to reach the east exit." She paused. "They will not use the east exit. I locked it from the maintenance panel 20 minutes ago." Holt stopped walking. He was 6 feet behind her. His own weapon was raised and then was not, something in the geometry of this woman making it feel deeply wrong to point a gun at her back. "Who are you?" he said. She turned then, finally, and looked at him. Those dark eyes, the ones that made people feel listened to, they were very calm. Not the calm of someone who had shut down under pressure, but the calm of someone who had never needed to shut anything down because nothing in this building came close to the loudest thing she had ever survived. "I'm the nurse," she said. He stared at her. She held his gaze without any effort at all. "You're going to want to clear that wing with me," she said, "because they are listening right now and we are spending time we do not have." She looked at the corner again. "Stay to my left and do not fire until I tell you. If I say down, you go down immediately. No questions. Can you do that?" Holt was a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy SEALs. He had cleared buildings in Fallujah, Mosul, and 3 other places the public had no names for. Nobody told him when to fire. Nobody told him to get down with no questions. "Yes," he said. He did not know why he said it immediately. He only knew that something in how she stood, how she spoke, how she had already done what he had come here to do. It answered a question he had not known he was asking. She moved toward the corner. He moved with her. And somewhere in the administration wing ahead of them, two men who had walked into a hospital thinking they were in control were about to discover, violently and finally, that they were not the most dangerous person in the building. They never had been. Not from the moment Ava Castillo had walked through the front doors 3 weeks ago, quiet and polite, with her soft face and her dark eyes, and the 7 years she never mentioned to anyone. Not from the moment she had looked out that window at 6:42 in the morning and started counting everything that was wrong. She had known. She had always known. She had been waiting for the rest of them to catch up. They moved into the administration wing side by side, and Holt noticed immediately that Ava moved differently from any non-military person he had ever walked a corridor with. She did not hug the wall the way untrained people do when they are frightened, pressing themselves flat against it as if the plaster will protect them. She moved at an angle, using the wall as a reference point, but keeping her body fluid, her center of gravity low, her weight always distributed in a way that let her change direction without a preparatory step. It was the kind of movement that gets drilled into a person over hundreds of hours until it stops being conscious and becomes as natural as breathing. Holt watched it out of the corner of his eye and felt something cold and specific settle into his chest. Not fear, recognition. He had seen people move like that. He moved like that. His team moved like that. Nurses did not move like that. He did not say anything. There was no time. She stopped at the first door on the left, the records anteroom, and pressed 2 fingers against it near the handle, feeling for vibration the way a tracker feels the ground. She shook her head once. Empty. They moved past it. The corridor bent to the right ahead of them, and beyond that bend was the main administration office, the network server room, and a storage area that connected through a locked door to the east wing stairwell, the stairwell she had said she locked from the maintenance panel. Holt pulled her shoulder gently and she stopped. He leaned close. If the east exit is locked, they know they are trapped. Cornered people make bad decisions. Yes, she said, not whispering, just speaking quietly. They will either try to breach the lock or they will go back through the main corridor looking for another exit. If they go back through the main corridor, they will walk directly into your team. She thought for 1 second. Or they will take a hostage. The word landed between them like something physical. How many patients are still in rooms on this floor? Holt said. 3, rooms 301, 304, and 309. 309 is the farthest from us. She paused. 309 is also the one with a direct sightline from the administration corridor intersection. Holt clicked his radio twice, the signal for Reyes to hold position. He got 2 clicks back. Good. If one of them goes for 309, then we do not have time to finish this conversation, Ava said, and she moved around the corner. The first thing Holt saw when he came around behind her was that she had stopped moving. The second thing he saw was why. The door to the main administration office was open, not ajar, not kicked in, but open in the deliberate way that means someone wanted it open, an invitation or a setup. And standing in the doorway, with his back half turned to them and a radio pressed to his ear, was one of the intruders. Tall, broad, body armor under his vest, moving his head in the short, sharp nods of someone receiving information he does not like. Ava had her weapon raised. She did not fire. Holt did not fire. The intruder had not seen them yet, and for 3 full seconds, the 3 of them occupied the same corridor in a kind of terrible stillness that Holt recognized as the moment before everything accelerates past the point of control. Then the intruder's radio squawked, something in Arabic, sharp, agitated, and the man went rigid. He turned his head. He saw them. What followed happened in the space of a breath. The intruder spun and brought his weapon up fast, very fast, trained fast. and Holt was already moving laterally and firing, and Ava dropped to one knee and fired twice from below the line of Holt's shot, and the man went down hard, backwards into the administration office, knocking a desk chair across the floor with a sound like a car collision in a small room. Silence. 2 seconds of it. Then Holt said, "Where is the second one?" Ava was already up. "The radio call." Someone told him something. He reacted. He was about to move when he saw us. She stepped into the office and looked at the fallen man without sentiment. His radio is still live. Holt came in behind her. The radio on the floor was still transmitting, a low, continuous voice speaking in Arabic, not the same agitated voice as before, something slower now, more controlled, more patient. Holt spoke basic Arabic, enough to function in the field, not enough to catch nuance. He crouched and listened. 2 words came through clearly. He knew both of them. The first one meant waiting. The second one meant roof. He looked up at Ava. She had already heard it. Her face had changed. Not panicked, not surprised, just recalibrated. The way a navigator looks when the wind shifts and they need to redraw the course. "There is someone on the roof," she said. "We knew about the rooftop across the street," Holt said. "My man saw movement." "Not across the street," she said. "On this roof. On this building." She looked at the ceiling. "The generator, the power drain your man noticed this morning, that was not a jammer on the outside. It was a jammer installed on this building. Someone was up there before we even woke up this morning." The silence that followed that sentence had a different quality from all the silences before it. This was the silence of understanding something unpleasant all at once. The 6 men who came through the front doors, the explosion, the rush, the chaos in the corridors, none of that was the operation. It was the distraction. Holt was on his radio before she finished. "Reyes, get to the roof access, now. Someone is up there. Treat as hostile." He was already moving out of the administration office and back toward the stairwell. "Kowalski, what is your position?" "Second floor south corridor." Kowalski came back. "All clear down here. 4 tangos neutralized. Rodriguez is..." "Holt, Rodriguez is breathing. He took a hit to the vest. He is down, but he is breathing." Something in Holt's chest loosened by a fraction. "Keep him still. Do not move him until..." He stopped walking. He had almost said until the nurse gets there, and something about that sentence in the current context struck him with a force that was almost funny if the situation had allowed for funny. He said instead, "Until we clear the roof." "Copy? Copy." Ava was right behind him. She had the radio from the dead intruder in her left hand, still listening. "They are not responding to him anymore," she said. "Whoever is on the roof, they have gone quiet, which means they either completed what they came to do or they know we identified them." "What did they come to do?" Holt said. He was moving fast up the north stairwell, taking stairs 2 at a time. "What is on this roof that matters?" "The communications array," she said, keeping pace with him effortlessly, which he also noticed. "Al-Rashid runs a secondary encrypted communications relay for 3 forward operating bases. If you take out the array or corrupt the signal, those FOBs lose their backup comm channel. They go dark." Holt stopped on the landing between the 3rd floor and the roof access. He turned and looked at her. "How do you know that?" She looked back at him. The question was reasonable. The answer was complicated. She could see him working through what he already knew, which was that she had moved like a soldier, fought like a soldier, and now spoke like an intelligence officer, and none of those things appeared in the file he had read on Ava Castillo, registered nurse, volunteer assignment. "That is a longer conversation," she said. "Roof first." He held her gaze for 1 more second. Then he said, "Roof first," and turned back to the stairs. The roof access door was a heavy steel fire door with a push bar and a hydraulic closer. The kind of door that makes a specific sound when it is opened. A heavy mechanical click, followed by the long sigh of the closer piston. Anyone on the other side of that door would hear it the moment the bar was pushed. There was no way to open it quietly, which meant whoever was on the other side of it already knew they were coming the moment Reyes had tried the handle 30 seconds earlier. Reyes was pressed to the wall beside the door when they reached the landing. He looked at Holt. He looked at Ava. He had the particular expression of a man who has many questions and has decided that right now was not the time for any of them. "I heard movement on the other side," Reyes said. "At least one person, maybe two. They stopped moving about 20 seconds ago." "Did you hear the array?" Holt said. "Heard something, a sound like, I don't know, like a high-pitched tone for about 10 seconds, and then nothing." Holt and Ava looked at each other at the same time. "They already activated it," she said. "Whatever they came to do to the array, they did it. They are not up there working anymore. They are waiting." "For what?" Reyes said. "For extraction," Holt said. "Or for us." The radio in Ava's hand crackled. The slow, patient voice was back. She listened for 4 seconds, her eyes not moving, her face doing the thing it did when she was computing. Then she pulled the radio away from her ear and said, very quietly, "Helicopter. 8 minutes." Reyes said, "There is no helicopter scheduled. Not one of ours," she said. The three of them stood in the stairwell and understood the shape of the thing at the same time. The explosion. The 6 men in the corridors. The chaos. The radio silence. All of it designed to keep the SEAL team in the building, in the corridors, down in the wards, while someone on the roof completed the actual mission and waited 8 minutes for a ride out. Clean, simple, and it had almost worked. "We go through the door hard," Holt said. "Reyes, left. I go right. You?" He looked at Ava, and for the first time since the corner of the administration corridor, he hesitated. Not because he doubted her, because sending a nurse, a volunteer, a civilian, whatever she actually was, through a hostile breach was not something he could let sit clean in his conscience afterward. She read it on his face. "I will be fine," she said. The simplicity of it stopped his objection before it started. "Stay behind the threshold until I call clear on the left side," he said. She did not agree or disagree. She just looked at the door. Reyes hit the push bar and went left, and Holt went right, and the roof opened up around them. Bright, flat, the morning sun hitting everything hard. And there were 2 of them, both positioned behind the communications array housing on the far side of the roof. Both armed, both already oriented toward the door because they had heard the stairwell. Because of course they had. The first burst of fire came from the left, tracking toward Reyes, and Holt dropped and returned fire and heard Reyes go down behind him. Not hit, he realized immediately, dropped by his own momentum. And then the second intruder was moving fast, not toward them, but sideways, toward the edge of the roof. And Holt understood with a lurch that the man was not running from them. He was moving to a position, and the position he was moving to had a sight line down into the rear courtyard where the medical evacuation point was, where Kowalski was, where Rodriguez was lying on the ground, unable to move. "Left side," Ava's voice came from the doorway, and Holt spun, and the first intruder was no longer behind the array housing. He had moved during the exchange with the second man, moved fast and quietly while Holt's attention broke, and he was now 8 feet to Holt's left, weapon up, and Holt was not going to make the angle in time. The shot came from the doorway, one shot, and the first intruder sat down on the rooftop like a man who has suddenly and urgently needed to rest, and did not get back up. Holt swung back to the second intruder. The man had reached his position at the roof edge. He was looking down into the courtyard. He was raising his weapon. And Holt was 40 feet away across an open roof with zero cover between them. He was not going to make it. He ran anyway. He was 20 feet away when the second intruder looked up from the courtyard sightline, turned, and looked directly at Holt. And in that moment, something happened that Holt would spend a long time afterward trying to explain to people who had not been there. The man looked past Holt. He looked at something behind Holt, and his face changed. Not into fear, exactly, into something more specific than fear. Into the expression of a man who has just understood that he calculated wrong about something fundamental. Holt threw himself flat without knowing why. Pure instinct. Or maybe the instinct was triggered by the change in the man's face, by some primitive reading of another human's sudden realization that the world had shifted underneath him. The shot that came from behind Holt was clean and final. He lay on the roof for 1 second. Then he got up and turned around. Ava was standing 20 feet behind him, still in the shooter's stance, the weapon now lowering slowly. She had crossed 40 feet of open rooftop in the time it took Holt to cover 20, and had made the shot he could not make from an angle he had not seen, because he had been looking forward when he should have been doing the math on the whole geometry of the space. Reyes was standing up. He was unhurt. He was staring at Ava with his mouth open in a way that was not something Holt had ever seen on Reyes's face before. And Reyes had been in 7 combat deployments. Nobody said anything for a moment. The roof was clear. The morning sun was still hitting everything hard and indifferent. Then Holt said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended, "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Ava lowered the weapon fully and looked at him. The quiet came back into her face, that specific quality of quiet that he had misread as nurse calm when he first saw her that morning at the window. It was not calm. It was containment. The kind of containment that only comes from years of learning to put things back into their boxes when the boxes need to be closed. "Scout Sniper School," she said. "Camp Pendleton. Graduated second in my class." She paused. "I was angrier about that for longer than I should have been." Reyes made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. Holt stared at her. "You are Marine Corps." "I was Marine Corps," she said. 7 years, 2 deployments. Then I went to nursing school." She said it the way you say a sentence that contains an ocean of things you are not going to explain right now. "The nursing is also real. I am also actually a nurse. The 2 things are not in conflict." "The file on you," Holt started, "says what it says," she said simply. "I was told the assignment here would be quiet." Something moved across her face then, brief and complex, something that was not amusement but was adjacent to it. "I was told wrong." Holt's radio came alive. Kowalski from the courtyard, his voice tight. "Holt, Rodriguez is asking for the nurse. He is awake, and he is asking specifically for the nurse. Says she was the one who checked on him at 5:30 this morning, and he wants her, not anyone else." A pause. "He also says to tell you that she told him this morning, before the explosion, that something felt wrong about the day." Those were her words, Holt. "Something feels wrong about this day." Another pause. He thought she was just nervous. A new volunteer. He didn't think. Kowalski stopped. "He says he's sorry he didn't listen." Holt looked at Ava. She had already heard every word. Her expression had not changed. She looked at the rooftop door, already thinking about Rodriguez, already shifting back. And this was the thing that Holt would remember most clearly later, would describe to his team commander in exactly these words. She was already shifting back into the nurse, like she had a switch, and the switch was not about suppression or denial, but about genuine purpose. And the purpose was the same whether she was moving through a corridor with a weapon or bending over a hospital bed checking a pulse. She was there to keep people alive. The method varied, the purpose did not. "I need to get to Rodriguez," she said. "I know," Holt said. And then, because it needed saying, and he was not a man who let things that needed saying go unsaid. "You saw the truck at 6:42. "Yes." "You started counting things wrong before any of us were even briefed." "Yes." "You locked the east exit before the shooting started. You moved the patient to the bathroom before the first shot was fired. You were already in position in that stairwell while my team was still getting to the stairs." He looked at her, and the look was not accusatory or interrogative, just direct. "How long did you know?" She considered the question, not because she did not know the answer, but because she was deciding how much of it to give him. I was not certain, she said finally. I had indicators, the truck, the rooftop shadow, the generator. I was reading the geometry of the morning. She paused. I spent 7 years reading the geometry of mornings that were about to go wrong. You do not stop seeing it just because you change your uniform. Holt nodded slowly. You should have told us. I should have, she agreed. It was not defensive, not apologetic, just honest. I weighed the cost of being wrong against the cost of being right, and I chose wrong. That is on me. She looked at him. 2 of your men are down. Rodriguez is hurt. The array was compromised. Those outcomes are on me as much as the ones I prevented. The directness of it hit Holt like a flat palm, not because it was harsh, but because it was exactly the kind of accountability he demanded from his own team, and almost never heard from anyone outside it. She was measuring herself by the same standard she would apply to anyone else. Not making herself a hero, not making herself a victim of circumstance, just measuring. Next time you count 11 things wrong with the morning, he said, you tell me before you hit 12. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, deal, and moved toward the roof door. They came back down through the stairwell in a different order than they had gone up. Reyes first, then Holt, then Ava. And it was on the second floor landing that Reyes stopped and turned and said, in the voice of a man who has been holding a question for 20 minutes and can no longer hold it, the 4 men in the corridors, the 2 in the stairwell, and the 2 in the wards. That was you, all 4 of them. It was not quite a question. Ava looked at him. Yes. In the time it took us to get from the operations room to the ground floor. You had farther to go, she said. Reyes stared at her. He was 32 years old and had done things in his career that he could not describe in polite company, and he was standing in a hospital stairwell being out-simplicitied by a woman in scrubs with blood on her left sleeve that was not hers. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He turned back around and kept walking down the stairs. Behind him, Ava looked at Holt. Holt looked at Ava. And for one brief human moment, in the middle of all of it, something passed between them that was almost, not quite, but almost, a shared acknowledgement of the absurdity of the morning. Not a smile, nothing as easy as a smile, just a fractional recognition that the world had briefly revealed itself to be stranger and harder and more surprising than even people who had trained for its strangeness had expected. Then Holt's radio went off again, and the moment was gone. Holt, it was Kowalski. The tone of his voice was different, not urgent in the combat sense, urgent in the way that means something has shifted, and the shift needs to be dealt with carefully. We have a problem, not a shooting problem, the other kind. Explain. The hospital administrator, Dr. Farhan, he was in lockdown in his office during the incident. He is out now. He has been briefed on the casualty summary. He is asking questions. A pause. He wants to know who authorized the use of lethal force by a non-security personnel. He wants to know who the nurse is. He has used the word liability 3 times in the last 4 minutes. The stairwell was quiet. Ava's expression did not change, but Holt saw something shift very slightly behind her eyes. Not worry, exactly, but something like recognition. Like she had known this particular hallway was coming. Like she had been down it before. Tell him we will be with him in 10 minutes, Holt said into the radio. Copy. He looked at Ava. You knew this part was coming too, he said. It always comes, she said. Not bitterly, just truthfully. The shooting is the easy part. She pushed through the stairwell door and walked into the second-floor corridor, where the morning, broken and reconstructed, and changed in ways that none of them had finished understanding yet, was waiting for whatever came next. The antiseptic smell was still there, the low hum of the generators, the linoleum under their boots. The hospital had not stopped being a hospital. The wounded were still wounded. The work was still the work. And somewhere downstairs, A man with a word like liability was waiting to tell a woman who had just saved dozens of lives that she had done something wrong by doing it. Ava walked toward the elevator without slowing down. She had been here before too, just wearing different clothes. Dr. Farouk Farhan was a 61-year-old man who had run Al Rashid Military Medical Center for 11 years and had survived 3 different political administrations, 2 budget crises, and 1 cholera outbreak that the official records still described as a minor gastrointestinal event. He was not a small man, physically or professionally, and when he stood in the middle of his own office with his arms crossed and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, he had the particular energy of someone who had already decided what the conversation was going to be before the other people arrived to have it. Holt walked in first. Ava walked in behind him. Reyes stayed in the doorway because the office was not large, and because Reyes had developed, in the last 40 minutes, the instinct to stay close to Ava Castillo without being entirely sure why. Farhan looked at Holt. Then he looked at Ava. Then he looked at the blood on her left sleeve with an expression that moved through several emotions quickly. Recognition, concern, something harder to name, and settled on the professional remove of a man who had decided that feelings were a problem for later. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, addressing Holt but not taking his eyes off Ava, "I have a hospital with a destroyed entrance, 6 dead in my corridors, 2 of your personnel down, and a communications array on my roof that your people are telling me has been tampered with in ways they cannot yet fully assess." He finally looked at Hope. "What I do not have is an explanation for how a volunteer nurse with 3 weeks of service at this facility became the primary responding combatant in a terrorist incursion on my building." "Dr. Farhan," Holt started. "I use the word liability deliberately," Farhan said, cutting him off cleanly and without apology, "because that is what this is. If she had missed, if a single patient had been harmed by crossfire, by a round that went through a wall, by anything that happened as a result of an unlicensed combatant operating in a medical facility, we would be having a very different conversation, a much worse one." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Ava said, "You are right." Farhan blinked. It was clearly not what he had expected. "You are completely right," she said again. Her voice was even, not defensive, not apologetic in the performative sense, just honest. The risk was real, and the decision was mine, and I made it unilaterally. If the outcomes had been different, the accountability would still be mine. She paused. But the outcomes were not different. And I want to be clear about what the outcomes would have been if I had done nothing. She let that sentence stand on its own for a moment. The 2 men who were heading toward the patient wards knew exactly where they were going. They had the room numbers. I found a handwritten schematic in the vest pocket of the one I stopped in the north stairwell. Rooms 301, 304, and 309 were circled. 3 patients, by name. The air in the office changed. Farhan uncrossed his arms slowly. "By name," Holt repeated, and it was not a question, but it needed to be said aloud. "By name," Ava said, which means this was not a random attack on a military medical facility. This was targeted, specific patients, specific rooms, specific timing. She looked at Farhan. "I can show you the schematic. It is in my scrub pocket." She took it out carefully and laid it flat on Farhan's desk. It was a folded piece of paper, hand-drawn in tight, precise lines, with Arabic notations in the margins and 3 circled numbers with names written next to them in English. Farhan looked at it. His face went through something complicated and arrived somewhere Holt had not expected. Not anger, not bureaucratic calculation, but something that looked, underneath everything, like fear. "These 3 patients," Farhan said quietly. "Do you know who they are?" "I know their files," Ava said. "General level. I was briefed on all current patients in my first week." "Then you know that 2 of them are military witnesses," Farhan said, "scheduled to give testimony in a proceeding that begins in 72 hours. And the 3rd," he stopped. He looked at Holt, Something passed between them, a look that had weight and history to it, and Holt went very still. "Who is the third?" Holt said, and his voice had the quality of a man asking a question he is not sure he wants answered. Farhan said a name. He said it quietly, the way you say something that is also a door opening into a much larger room. Holt knew the name. Ava watched his face absorb it and watched the implications move through him like a current, reorganizing everything. "He is not listed under his name in the patient registry," Holt said. "No," Farhan said. "He is listed under a cover designation, cleared eyes only." He looked at Ava, which she should not have known, which means whoever sent those men in here had access to information that goes considerably further up the chain than a hospital staff file. The room was very quiet. Ava said, "Someone gave them the registry." Nobody argued with that. Holt was on his radio before the sentence finished. He stepped back toward the doorway and spoke in the clipped, coded shorthand of a man who has just understood that the perimeter he thought he was defending is not where the actual breach happened. Reyes listened from the doorway, and Holt watched Reyes's face do the same thing his own face had done, absorb the shape of a much larger problem and recalibrate. Ava was still at the desk. Farhan was looking at her with an expression that had evolved in the last 4 minutes from adversarial to something more complicated. He said, "The schematic. How did you get it out of his vest pocket?" "He was not using it anymore," she said. Farhan looked at her for a long moment. He was a man who had spent his career in the intersection of medicine and military life, and he had a particular respect for precision, for people who said exactly what they meant and meant exactly what they said, without ornament. He recognized it in her. He also recognized something else, something that he filed away without commenting on directly because the moment was not yet the right one for it. "Where did you serve?" he said. "Helmand Province," she said. "In one deployment I cannot name the location of." He nodded slowly. "And then nursing school." "And then nursing school. The two things are not in conflict," he said, echoing words she had used earlier, words she had not said to him, which meant he was reading her the same way she read a room. She noticed that. She filed it. "No," she said, "they are not." Holt came back from the doorway. His face was doing the thing it did when the situation had just expanded past its previous dimensions, and he was mentally restructuring everything in real time. "I have my team commander on the line. He wants a full debrief in 30 minutes. The communications array situation is worse than we thought. Whoever was on the roof was not just disrupting the signal. They were reading it, copying it." Live traffic from 2 of the 3 FOBs went across the compromise relay for 11 minutes before we cleared the roof. He paused. 11 minutes is a long time for the wrong people to be listening. "What kind of traffic?" Ava said. "That is above my current clearance to answer you," Holt said, and she heard in his voice the particular frustration of a man who is aware that the person he is talking to is operating with more situational competence than his clearance levels are designed to account for. She did not push it. She already had a shape in her mind of what 11 minutes of live FOB traffic looked like, and it was not a comfortable shape. Farhan cleared his throat. "In the interest of the 30-minute window, my liability concern stands. But it is now secondary to a larger concern, which is that 3 of my patients were targeted by name, one of them under a cover designation, and the people who sent these men knew things that should have been impossible to know." He looked at both of them, which means one of 2 things. Either the intelligence breach predates this morning, or someone in this building is still providing information. The words still sat in the room like a stone dropped in water, sending ripples out in every direction. Reyes stepped fully into the room from the doorway. He looked at Holt. "The jammer on the roof. If it was installed before we woke up this morning, someone had building access before the attack." "Or during the night," Holt said. "Night staff," Ava said, not accusatory, analytical. I need the night shift roster. Farhan moved to his desk computer. His fingers moved quickly for a man who had just been through what the morning had been, and in 40 seconds he had the night roster on his screen. He read through it once. Then he went very still in a way that was different from the stillness of concentration. This was the stillness of someone who has just found something they did not want to find. Yusuf Karim, he said. Night maintenance. He was scheduled for 6 to 6. He paused. He has not clocked out. His key card has not been used since 3:47 this morning. He turned from the screen. He clocked in at 6 and disappeared before 6:45. 6:42, the time Ava had first seen the truck parked outside. She said, he let them in, not through the front, the maintenance access on the north side of the building, the one with the panel that does not lock properly. She said it without drama, just connecting points. He opened the north access. Someone went up to the roof, installed the jammer, and was in position before 7. Then the truck arrived. Then the 6 men came through the front as the distraction. She paused. Yusuf was supposed to be out of the building before the explosion. He was not supposed to be here when the shooting started. Which means he is either hiding, Holt said slowly, or he is not hiding at all. The implication landed. Reyes said it first, already heading for the door. He is still in the building. What followed was 12 minutes that moved at a different speed from everything before them. Not the explosive, compressed speed of the corridor engagements, but the particular taut speed of a building being systematically searched by people who know what they are looking for and are moving against a clock that has no visible face. Holt split the remaining functional team members across the building's blind spots, the basement utility corridors, the loading dock, the second generator room on the east side, while Ava went back to the maintenance panel network she had already mapped in her first 3 days. She moved through the service corridors with Reyes behind her, and Reyes had stopped making even internal comments about the situation because the situation had moved past the point where internal comments were adequate. She stopped at a junction in the basement utility corridor. She listened, not for footsteps. Footsteps were easy. She listened for the absence of normal sounds. The pipes in a building like this made a continuous, low conversation of hisses and knocks that most people tuned out within their first week. She had never tuned it out, and right now, 20 feet ahead of her and around a left-hand bend, one section of pipe was silent that should not have been silent. She held up one finger. Reyes stopped. She held up her palm, flat. Stay. She moved forward alone. Reyes's hand came out and touched her elbow briefly. She looked back at him. He shook his head once, meaning, don't go alone. She looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has already done the calculation and arrived at a conclusion. And he looked back at her with the expression of someone who is going to follow her anyway, regardless of what the calculation says. She let him come. Yusuf Karim was 28 years old and was sitting on the basement floor with his back against a utility pipe and his knees pulled to his chest and his face buried in his arms. He was not armed. He was shaking. Not the controlled shaking of someone managing adrenaline, but the full-body, uncontrolled shaking of someone who is terrified in a way that goes beyond the immediate moment and into something older and more total. He heard them come around the corner and his head came up, and for 1 second, everything in his posture said, flight. And then it collapsed into something that was not fight and was not flight, but was the third thing. The surrender that comes when a person has been carrying something too heavy for too long, and the weight finally becomes heavier than the fear of putting it down. He looked at Ava, not at Reyes and his weapon, at Ava, at the nurse. He said in English that was careful and precise in the way of someone who had learned it from textbooks and then practiced it until it was smooth. They have my brother. The corridor was silent. They have had my brother for 4 months, he said. I did not. I was told no one would die. I was told the men going in would take what they needed and leave. I was told. His voice broke apart. He pressed his hands against his mouth for a moment. When he took them away, his eyes were wet, and his face had the look of a man who has just finished understanding the full cost of something he cannot undo. They lied to me. Ava crouched down in front of him, not to interrogate, not to threaten, just to be at his level. She said, "What is your brother's name?" He blinked. Of all the things he had expected her to say, it was not that. "Tariq," he said. "How old is he?" 24. She nodded. "Where are they holding him?" He looked at her with an expression that was part desperate hope and part the suspicion of a man who has been given reason to distrust everyone. "Why do you ask me that?" "Because that is the next problem," she said simply. "And problems have solutions if you have the right information." Reyes was watching the exchange with his weapon lowered and an expression on his face that Holt would later describe in his written debrief as one of the more affecting things he had witnessed in a career full of affecting things. Because what Reyes was watching was not an interrogation and was not a negotiation. It was something simpler and more powerful than either of those things. It was a person choosing to treat another person as a person at the exact moment when every tactical protocol said to treat them as a resource. Yusef talked for 11 minutes without stopping. He gave them everything, not because he had been broken or threatened or offered anything in return, but because Ava had asked his brother's name, and that small act of humanizing had dissolved the last structure holding everything back. He told them about the 4 months of contact, the gradual escalation of demands, the moment he understood that what they were asking him to do would hurt people, and the moment after that when he had already agreed and could not find a way back. He told them about the location, a warehouse on the eastern side of the city, outside the wire, in a district that was technically a gray zone, not controlled by anyone who would acknowledge controlling it. He described it in detail, the kind of detail that comes from fear, from someone who had been there and had filed away everything their frightened mind could hold, because frightened minds are extraordinary archivists. By the time Holt arrived in the basement corridor, having been radioed by Reyes, Yusef had been helped to his feet and was sitting on a utility crate, still shaking but more slowly, and Ava was standing 3 feet away, writing nothing down because she did not need to. Holt looked at the scene. He looked at Reyes. Reyes looked back at him with an expression that said everything and nothing. Holt looked at Ava. "You got all of it?" "All of it," she said. "The warehouse location?" "Yes." "He is credible?" She considered for exactly 1 second. "Yes, he is credible." She paused. "And he is going to need protection. The people who used him will know by now that the operation failed. They will assume he talked, whether he did or not. He is a liability to them now, in the same way a failed operation is a liability." The word came back, liability, but in a completely different context now, carrying a completely different weight. Holt looked at Yusef. The young man was looking at the floor between his feet. He was 28 years old and had made a terrible decision for a reason that was not terrible, and was now sitting in a basement paying the price for the gap between those two things. "Your brother," Holt said. Yusef looked up. "We are going to work on that," Holt said. Not a promise precisely, but something that Yusef had clearly not expected from a man in a SEAL uniform in the basement of a building he had helped to attack. His face did something complicated. He nodded once, slowly, and looked back at the floor. They brought Yusef upstairs under escort and handed him to the MP unit that had arrived at the building 16 minutes after the initial alert. 16 minutes that had felt like a different lifetime. The lobby was a construction zone of emergency personnel, investigators, medical staff assessing the wounded, and the particular kind of controlled institutional chaos that follows a successful defense of something that was nearly not successfully defended. Rodriguez was on a gurney near the east entrance, awake and irritable, which was the best possible thing he could be. He had a cracked rib from the vest impact and a laceration above his left eye that had been closed with 4 stitches by a physician Ava had directed there with the particular authority of a nurse who had already decided what needed to happen before the doctor finished assessing the situation. Rodriguez watched Ava walk across the lobby from the direction of the stairwell. He watched her the way you watch something you are still processing. He said when she got close enough, "You told me something was wrong this morning." "I did," she said. She checked his pupil response with a small light from her breast pocket, efficiently, automatically. 5:30 in the morning, you came in to do rounds and you told me you thought something felt off about the day. "I did." He caught her wrist gently, the good wrist, the one without the blood on the sleeve above it. "I told you you were probably just adjusting to the deployment. I told you new volunteers always felt a little off their first few weeks." "You did." He looked at her. He was 26 years old, and he had a particular kind of decency in his face, the kind that shows up most clearly when someone is wrong and knows it. "I am sorry I did not take you seriously." She looked at him with those dark eyes that made people feel listened to. "You took a rifle round to the chest vest at close range, and you are still apologizing to other people," she said. "That is the most Marine thing I have heard today, and I have been in a combat situation." He blinked. Then something crossed his face, the specific confusion of a man who has just registered a detail. "Did you say Marine?" She said nothing. She removed the small light from her pocket. She checked his other pupil. "Oh," Rodriguez said, and then after a moment, "Oh." The team commander arrived at 37 minutes past the initial alert. He looked at the preliminary casualty and neutralization reports that Holt had transmitted ahead of his arrival. Then he looked at Holt and said, "Walk me through it." Holt walked him through it. He did it methodically, in the ordered, sequential way he had been trained. But the sequence had a shape to it that Commander Trace clearly recognized because he began asking his follow-up questions before Holt had finished each segment. Quick, sharp questions. What was the timing on the first neutralization? What was the weapon used in the stairwell? What was the shooting position on the roof? And then, where is Castillo? Not who is Castillo, where is she? Trace already knew who she was. Holt went still for a fraction of a second. It was not visible to most people. Reyes saw it. "She is in the ward," Holt said carefully, "doing post-incident patient assessment. Bring her here." She came out of the ward corridor and walked across the lobby and stood in front of Commander Trace. And Holt watched the moment they looked at each other and knew, immediately and without any possibility of doubt, that these two people had met before. Not just met, something more specific than that. Trace said, "Sergeant Castillo." She said, "Commander Trace." The lobby around them continued its controlled chaos. Personnel moving, radios crackling, equipment being logged. And in the middle of it, the two of them stood looking at each other across a silence that had history in it. Not bad history exactly, but weighted history. The kind between people who have occupied the same difficult ground and come out changed and have never quite finished processing it. "Your assignment here," Trace said, "volunteer nursing, quiet post, 3-week rotation." "Yes, sir," she said. "I approve that assignment." The room did not change outwardly, but Holt felt something shift in his understanding of the morning. A tectonic shift, slow and enormous. He looked at Trace, then at Ava, then back at Trace. "You knew," Holt said. He did not intend to say it out loud, but it came out because it was true, and he was not a man who held true things back when they needed to be said. "You knew who she was when you approved the assignment." Trace did not confirm or deny it. He looked at Ava and said, "You were told the assignment would be quiet." "I was told wrong," she said. She had said those exact words 2 hours ago in a stairwell, and they landed differently now because the audience was different. "Yes," Trace said, "you were." He paused. The pause had something in it, not quite regret, not quite apology, but something that acknowledged a gap between what had been said and what had been true. The 3 patients who were targeted. You know who they are now. I know who one of them is, she said. The one undercover designation. Trace looked at her. You knew before Farhan told you. She said nothing for a moment. Then, I recognize the medication protocol in his file. I have seen that specific combination once before. In Helmand province. In a briefing I was not supposed to be in. She paused. I did not say anything because I was not certain, and because my role here was not. Your role here, Trace said quietly, was exactly this, whether you understood that going in or not. The lobby noise continued around them. Holt stood very still. Reyes, 6 feet to his left, was looking at a point on the floor that he found apparently fascinating. Ava looked at Commander Trace for a long moment. Her face did the thing it did. The containment, the quiet, the managed depth of something much larger than what was visible. Then she said, and her voice was very level, I would like to know why a quiet nursing assignment at a military medical center required someone with my background. You would, Trace said, and you deserve an answer. He looked at her steadily, but not here, and not now. He looked out at the lobby, at the damaged entrance, the moving personnel, the long work of aftermath stretching ahead of all of them, and he said, to no one in particular, and to all of them at once, start the debrief. We have a warehouse location to verify, and 72 hours before testimony begins, and a communications breach that is going to require every clearance level we have to even begin to assess. He started walking. Then he stopped and looked back at Ava one more time. Good work, Sergeant. She had not been called that in 2 years. The word did something to her face that she did not let anyone see except for the fraction of a second before she put it away. It was not pride. It was something quieter and more complicated than pride. Something that lived in the space between who you were and who you had been, and whether those two people had ever really stopped being the same person. She turned back toward the ward corridor. She had patience. She had work. She had the thing she came here to do, the actual thing, the one that had been true since before the Marine Corps, and through the Marine Corps, and after it, the need to keep people alive, in whatever way the moment required. Behind her, Holt watched her go. He had been in the special operations community for 11 years, and he had served alongside people of extraordinary capability, and he had his own version of pride in what the teams he belonged to could do. He was not a man easily impressed by another person's competence. He understood, standing in that lobby, that he was impressed. More than that, he was recalibrating the morning, the file he had read and dismissed, the window moment, the truck at 6:42, all the things that had happened before the explosion that he had not seen because he had looked at the person standing at the window and had seen a nurse and had stopped looking. He had stopped looking. That was the lesson the morning had given him, and it was not a comfortable one, and it was the kind that does not go away. The debrief room smelled like burnt coffee and recycled air, and the particular tension of people who have been through something and are now being asked to translate it into language that fits on a form. Holt sat at the head of the table. Reyes and Kowalski sat to his left. Rodriguez had been cleared for limited duty by the on-call physician and had insisted on being present, which meant he was sitting very carefully in the chair closest to the door, with his ribs taped and his face carrying the specific expression of a man in pain who has decided that the pain is not the most important thing in the room. Ava was not at the table. She was still in the ward. She had been in the ward for 40 minutes since the lobby exchange with Commander Trace, moving between patients with the focused quiet of someone who has put one version of themselves back in its box and returned fully to another. Tomas in Ward C had come out of the bathroom when she knocked and said his name and rank, exactly as she had instructed, and had grabbed her hand when she checked his blood pressure and said, I heard the shots. I heard everything. Are you okay? And she had told him yes, she was fine, and had meant it in the specific way that people who have been through things mean it. Not that nothing happened, but that they are still standing, which is enough. Commander Trace sat at the far end of the debrief table and listened to Holt's account with the stillness of a man who is hearing confirmation of things he already suspected, rather than information that is new to him. He asked clarifying questions at precise intervals. He wrote nothing down. His memory, Holt knew from experience, was the kind that recorded everything and lost nothing, and could reproduce a 30-minute briefing verbatim 3 weeks later without effort. When Holt finished, Trace was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The schematic, the room numbers with patient names. Who has it now?" "Evidence log," Holt said. "MP unit took it with the rest of the physical material from the scene." "I need it pulled from the log," Trace said, "before it gets processed into the standard channel." The room understood what that meant. Standard channel meant documentation that would be visible to a broader set of eyes than the people in this room. Trace was saying, without saying it directly, that the information on that schematic, specifically the presence of a cover-designated patient whose identity had been known to the attackers, needed to stay contained until they understood how it had gotten out. Kowalski cleared his throat. He was the youngest member of the team, 26, and he had the habit of clearing his throat when he was about to say something that he knew was going to land awkwardly. "Sir, the schematic had 3 names. We know about the 2 military witnesses. We know about the cover designation." He paused. "The 3rd name, room 309. That patient was moved this morning, before the attack." Everyone at the table looked at him. "I checked the ward logs while Reyes was running the basement search," Kowalski said. "Room 309 was vacated at 0600. Patient transferred to a different facility. Unscheduled transfer. Authorization came through at 0547. He put a printed page on the table. "The authorization signature is Dr. Farhan's." Holt looked at the paper. He looked at Trace. "Farhan moved him." "Farhan moved him," Trace said, not surprised, confirming. "Before the attack," Holt said slowly. "Farhan moved the cover-designated patient before the attack. Which means Farhan knew," Reyes said. He said it flat and certain, the way Reyes said things that he had already run through his internal processing and arrived at a conclusion about. Not necessarily about the attack specifically, but about the threat to that patient. He knew enough to move him. The room was very quiet. Rodriguez shifted in his chair and winced and said nothing. Trace looked at the transfer authorization for a long moment. Then he said, "Farhan has been the administrator of this facility for 11 years. He has worked alongside 3 different American security rotations. He has a service record in the Iraqi army that goes back to the early 90s, and a cooperation file with coalition forces that is," he paused, "complicated." "Complicated how?" Holt said. "Complicated in the way that all files from people who have survived this region for 30 years are complicated," Trace said. "He has done things for us. He has done things around us. He has, on at least 2 documented occasions, done things that we did not ask him to do and did not know about until afterward that turned out to be correct." He looked at the transfer authorization again. "Moving that patient before a threat he should not have known about is one of those things." "You are telling me he is an asset," Holt said. Trace did not answer that directly. He said, "I am telling you that Farouk Farhan is a man who has been navigating the space between impossible choices for longer than most people in this building have been alive, and that his actions this morning, whatever their source, resulted in the protection of a critical asset." He stood up from the table. "I am also telling you that the question of how he knew is the question we need to answer before anything else." He was at the door when Holt said, "Sir," Trace stopped. "Castillo, the assignment here, quiet nursing post, volunteer rotation. You approved it personally." Holt let that sit for a second. "Al-Rashid specifically, this facility, not any of the other 4 medical centers in the region." Trace turned around. He looked at Holt with the specific look of a commanding officer who has assessed whether a subordinate has earned the right to finish a thought and has decided Yes. Go ahead. You put her here because of the cover patient, Holt said. Not because you knew the attack was coming, but because you knew the patient was a risk. A high-value target in a medical cover, and you wanted someone in the building who could respond to a threat profile that your standard security rotation was not configured for. He paused. You needed someone who would not look like protection. The room was completely silent. Rodriguez had forgotten about his ribs. Trace looked at Holt for a long moment. Then he said, "Write that up in your debrief report and I will deny every word of it." He paused. 1 second. But yes. He left. The door closed behind him. Reyes said, very quietly, "She did not know." "No," Holt said. "She did not know." He put her in a facility he expected to be targeted and did not tell her what she was actually there for. He put her in a facility he hoped would not be targeted, but planned for the possibility, Holt said. He was working through his own response to this, and the response was complicated, and he was not going to let the complication run ahead of the facts. And she handled it. "She more than handled it," Kowalski said. "Yes," Holt said. "She did." He stood, which is exactly why he chose her, and exactly why she is going to be angry when she finds out. She was changing a wound dressing on a supply specialist named Gutierrez in Ward B when Holt appeared in the doorway. She did not look up from the dressing. She said, "Give me 90 seconds. He waited. She finished the dressing, checked Gutierrez's chart, told him to sleep and mean it this time, and came out into the corridor. She pulled the door to Ward B, half closed behind her, and looked at Holt with those eyes that had been reading things all day. "You found something in the debrief," she said. "Several things," he said. "Walk with me." They walked. He told her about the transfer authorization, about Farhan moving the patient at 0547, about Trace's non-answer that was also a complete answer. He told her about the conclusion he had drawn and the one-word confirmation he had received before the door closed. She listened without interrupting. She walked at his pace, which was quick, and her face during the telling was very still in the way it got when she was receiving information that she was organizing as it arrived. When he finished, she said nothing for a moment. They had reached the end of the corridor, the window at the north end, the same window where she had stood that morning at 6:42, watching a truck that was not moving. She stood at the window again. Different morning now, different weight in the air. "He put me here," she said. "Yes." "Knowing the threat profile?" "Yes." "And did not brief me on the actual purpose of the assignment?" "No." She was quiet for a moment. "He had no way of knowing I would see the truck, or count the things wrong, or get to those corridors before your team?" "No," Holt said. "He put you here because of what you are capable of. But he did not know this morning would happen the way it happened." "He hoped it would not happen at all," she said. "And if it did, he wanted someone in the building who could respond. And he calculated that telling me what I was actually there for would change how I behaved. That knowing I was there as protection for a specific patient would make me act differently than believing I was just a nurse." Holt said nothing because she was right, and they both knew it. She turned from the window. Her face had gone through something and come out the other side of it. Not anger, exactly. Something cleaner than anger and more lasting. "He was not wrong," she said. "If I had known, I would have been watching for a specific threat profile instead of reading the whole morning. I might have missed the truck. I might have been oriented toward the wrong thing." She paused. "He was not wrong. I still wish he had told me." "I know," Holt said. "Those are not contradictory," she said. "No," he said. "They are not." She started to walk back toward the ward. Then she stopped. She turned around slowly, and Holt saw something change in her face. Not the tactical recalibration he had seen all morning, but something more internal. Something that moved through her like a current finding its ground. "The cover patient," she said. "Room 309. He was moved this morning. He is safe. She looked at Holt. I need to know who he is. That is above your current. I know his medication protocol, she said. I told Trace I had seen it once before. In a briefing I was not supposed to be in Helmand. In the second deployment I cannot name the location of. She looked at him steadily. The briefing was about an intelligence source, a deep cover operative who had been embedded for 4 years and had recently surfaced with information about a network that operated across 3 countries. The medication protocol was for a neurological condition, a specific one, rare enough that I remembered it. She paused. I have been looking at that patient's file for 3 weeks, and I did not say anything because I told myself I was wrong, that it was coincidence, that the same protocol could be prescribed for different patients for different reasons. Holt was very still. But it is not coincidence, she said, is it? He did not answer. That man in room 309, she said, the one Farhan moved before 7 this morning. That is the operative from the Helmand briefing. He is not just a cover patient. He is the source, the one who surfaced, the one with information about the network. She looked at Holt, and the network found him. That is what today was. Not an attack on a military hospital, not a communications breach as the primary objective. Those were secondary. The primary objective was that patient, and when they could not get to him because Farhan moved him, the communications breach became the fallback. 11 minutes of live FOB traffic as a consolation prize. The corridor was empty around them. Somewhere below them, the lobby was still full of personnel doing the work of aftermath. Up here it was just the 2 of them, and the weight of what she had just said. You need to tell Trace, Holt said. I know, she said, but first I need you to tell me I am right. He looked at her. She had read 7 years of dangerous mornings with those dark eyes, and the morning she was describing had started 4 years before she arrived in Iraq, and had arrived at this corridor, in this window, in this moment by a route that was longer and more complex than any of them had understood when the day began. He said, You are right. She nodded once. Okay, she said, let us go find Trace. They found him not in the debrief room, but in Farhan's office, standing across the desk from Farhan, in a conversation that had the quality of a meeting between 2 people who know each other in ways that are not on any official document. Farhan looked up when Holt and Ava came in. Trace looked up. The 2 men exchanged a glance that lasted less than a second and contained more information than a page of text. Ava looked at Farhan. She said, You moved him because you knew. How did you know? Farhan looked at Trace. Trace said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Farhan sat down in his chair. He was 61 years old and he looked, in this moment, more of them than he had in the lobby that morning. He said, I received a communication at 05:15 from a source I have worked with for 9 years. The communication said that something was planned for this facility. No details, no timing, just that the man in room 309 was the reason, and that I should move him. Who is your source? Ava said. Farhan looked at her with an expression that was almost gentle. You already know who my source is, he said, or you would not be in this office asking me that question instead of asking Commander Trace. The office was very quiet. Ava said, Youssef. Farhan said nothing for a moment. Then, Youssef Karim has been providing information to me for 2 years. Not as an agent, not as anything formal. As a young man who understood what was happening around him and was frightened and needed someone to tell. I was that someone. He paused. When they approached him 4 months ago and took his brother, he told me. I told him to comply, to do what they asked, to give me whatever information he could in the process. He looked at his hands. I told him no one would be seriously hurt. I was operating on the assumption that forewarned meant forearmed, meant the facility would respond appropriately and the attack would be repelled cleanly. His voice dropped slightly. I did not anticipate the gap between the warning and the response being filled by a single person. He looked at Ava when he said that last sentence, not accusatorially, with something that was, in its way, the closest thing to awe that a 61-year-old man who had stopped being awed by most things could manage. Trace said, "Youssef's brother, Tariq, what do you know about where they are holding him?" "I know the district," Farhan said. "I know the general area. Youssef gave me a description 4 weeks ago when he was still able to make contact with them." He paused. "I passed the information up the chain. It went into a file somewhere. Nothing happened." Holt looked at Trace. "We have a warehouse location from Youssef's debrief this morning," he said. "Specific, detailed. He had been there." "It will have changed," Trace said. "They will have moved after the operation failed." "Maybe," Holt said. "Maybe not immediately. Movement takes logistics. If they were expecting a clean exit this morning, helicopter, 8 minutes, mission accomplished. They may not have a secondary site prepped and ready." Ava said, "The helicopter, it did not come." "No," Holt said. "We had it diverted. Air assets responded to the jammer signal from our roof and identified the inbound. It turned back before it reached the wire." "So the people who were waiting for extraction are still waiting," she said, "which means whoever is running this operation has been out of contact with their ground team for," she checked the clock on Farhan's wall, "over 2 hours, and the ground team is neutralized. And the communications breach gave them partial intelligence but not the full picture. And Tariq is at a location their ground team knew, which is now a location their ground team cannot tell them has been compromised." She looked at Trace. "You have a window." "A small one," Trace said. "Yes," she said, "but a window." Trace looked at her for a long moment, in the specific way of a commanding officer who is about to say something that will require the other person to make a decision. "The warehouse location Youssef provided. We need it verified before any action. Verification requires eyes on the ground in a district where American military presence is not feasible without triggering exactly the kind of attention that would close the window." He paused. "We need someone who looks like they belong there." Holt went very still. He saw where this was going before Trace finished the sentence, and his reaction to seeing it was not simple. "No," he said. He said it before Trace completed the thought, which was unusual for him. "She has been through this facility's entire incident from 0642 to now. She is—" "I am fine," Ava said. She said it to Holt, not to Trace. She said it with the particular directness of someone who needs the person they are saying it to actually receive it and not argue with it because the argument will waste time that the situation does not have. Holt looked at her. "Castillo, I have done 3 verifications in more difficult conditions than a gray zone warehouse district," she said. "I know how to move without looking like I am moving with purpose. I know the language at a conversational level. I have a cover that is entirely real. I am a medical volunteer. I have documentation. I have a legitimate reason to be in that district because there is a clinic 2 blocks from the location Youssef described." She paused. "And Trace knows all of this, which is why he is looking at me instead of at you." Trace said, "I need a yes or a no. It is your choice, entirely voluntary." She looked at him. "You said I deserved an explanation for why a quiet nursing assignment required my background." "I did say that. Is this the explanation?" The room was very quiet. Farhan was watching from his chair. Holt's jaw was working. Reyes, who had appeared in the doorway at some point in the last 3 minutes without anyone noticing, was looking at the floor. Trace said, "This facility was chosen because the cover patient needed a location with medical legitimacy and a security profile that would not advertise his presence. Your assignment was chosen because if the threat materialized, I needed the response capacity without the footprint." He paused. "I owe you a more complete conversation than that. You will get it. But right now there is a 24-year-old man in a warehouse who is alive only because his brother made a decision this morning that cost him everything. and the window for getting to him is measured in hours. She looked at Trace for a long moment. Then she looked at Holt. His face was doing something that he was not quite managing to keep off it. Something that was part professional objection, in part something else. Something that had nothing to do with chain of command and everything to do with the morning they had just been through together, and the specific gravity that develops between people who have been through hard things in close proximity. She said, "Holt." He said, "What?" "I will come back," she said, simply, like a fact. His jaw worked once more. Then he exhaled. "I know you will," he said. She went to change out of the scrubs with the blood on the sleeve. She went alone, down the corridor, and she closed the door of the staff locker room behind her and stood in the silence for a moment. Just a moment. She looked at the blood on her sleeve and she thought about the morning, the whole arc of it from 5:30 rounds to this, and she felt the weight of all of it settle through her the way weight settles. Not crushing, just present, distributed through every part of her, carried rather than borne. She had not asked for this morning. She had asked for 3 weeks in a quiet post and the chance to do the work that she came to do. She had asked, if she was honest about it, for a period of time in which nothing required the part of her that the Marine Corps had built and that nursing school had not dismantled, and that apparently, no matter what she wore or where she went, was always going to be the first thing that showed up when the building started coming apart. She did not regret it. That was the thing she needed to check, and she checked it, and the answer was no. She did not regret a single decision she had made from 642 onward. She was sorry for the men they had lost. She was sorry that Youssef had been in the position he was in. She was sorry that Tariq was in a warehouse somewhere, waiting for a resolution to a situation he had not chosen. She carried all of that, and she would carry it. But regret was something different from sorrow, and she did not regret it. She changed into civilian clothes. She put her nursing ID in the locker. She picked up the small bag that Trace's logistics contact had left outside the door. She had not heard them leave it, which told her they had been efficient about it, and she checked the contents quickly, methodically. Documentation, currency, a phone with a specific configuration, a medical kit that was genuinely a medical kit because her cover was genuine, because Trace understood that the best cover was not a fiction, but a truth with certain facts omitted. She put the bag over her shoulder. She opened the locker room door. Holt was in the corridor. She had not expected him to be there, and the fact that he was told her something about the morning that neither of them had said directly. He said, "Reyes is pulling the vehicle, 30 minutes to the district boundary." He said it like he was giving a logistics brief, like that was the reason he was standing in the corridor outside the locker room, and they both knew it was not. She said, "You do not need to walk me out." "I know," he said, and he walked with her anyway. They passed the ward corridor on the way to the east exit. She slowed, almost without meaning to, at the door to Ward C. She could see through the narrow window in the door. Tomas was sitting up in his bed, the young corporal, doing something with his good hand and the fingers that were left on his other one. Some small fidgeting movement that people make when they are processing things too large to process. He looked up at the window at the exact moment she looked through it. He raised his good hand. A small wave. She raised hers back. She kept walking. At the east exit, Rodriguez was standing. He had gotten off the gurney against medical advice, which was exactly what Rodriguez was going to do, and nobody had the energy to argue with him about it. He looked at the bag over her shoulder. He looked at her civilian clothes. He did the math quickly, the way soldiers do. He said, "Where?" "Out," she said. He looked at her. "Tariq," he said. He had been in the basement when Youssef gave the location. He had not been there, but he had been on the radio, and the radio carried things. "They are going after Tariq." "Someone is going to," she said. He looked at her for one more second. Then he said, "Youssef is in MP custody. He does not know the status of the operation or of his brother. He has been sitting in a room for 2 hours not knowing." He paused. When you find what you find, whatever you find, someone needs to tell him. Not through channels, not in official language. Someone needs to sit with him and tell him in a way that... He stopped. He was 26 years old, and he had a particular kind of decency in his face. And right now that decency was doing the thing it did when something mattered. In a way that a person deserves to be told things. She looked at him. "I will make sure of it," she said. He nodded. He stepped aside. She went through the door. The vehicle was a nondescript civilian truck, the kind that existed in thousands of identical copies across the city, driven by a man whose name she was not given and did not ask for. She got in the back. The city moved past the windows in its ordinary morning way, indifferent to everything that had happened in the last 3 hours, carrying on with the business of existing the way cities do, regardless of what any particular building on any particular street has just survived. She checked her phone. There was one message sent 3 minutes ago from a number she did not recognize. It contained a single photograph, a satellite image, a warehouse in a gray zone district with a timestamp from 40 minutes earlier showing a vehicle that had not been there in the previous surveillance image. Someone was still there. Someone had not moved. The window was still open. She put the phone in her pocket. She thought about Youssef on the floor of the basement, shaking. She thought about Rodriguez at the door with his taped ribs, asking her to tell a person things in the way that a person deserves to be told. She thought about Holt in the corridor outside the locker room, standing there for no logistics reason at all. She thought about Trace and the word he had said in the lobby, Sergeant, and what it had done to her face before she put it away. And she thought about Tomas in Ward C, with his good hand, and his partial hand, and his small wave through the window, which was the thing that she would think about last in the moments before she went through whatever door the next hour put in front of her. Because it was the purest and simplest version of what all of it was actually for. The truck moved through the city. She rode in silence. Ahead of her was a warehouse and a 24-year-old man and a window that was measured in hours. Behind her was a hospital that was still standing and the people in it who were still alive because of a morning that had started at 5:30 and had not yet finished teaching everyone involved what it needed to teach them. She had told Holt she would come back. She meant it. She always meant what she said. That was one of the things that never changed, no matter which uniform she was or was not wearing. The city moved past the windows. She watched it, those dark eyes reading everything, missing nothing. She was not finished yet. The truck stopped 2 blocks from the warehouse, and she got out without a word and walked the rest of the way on foot, because that was how it was done. You never arrived at the destination directly. You arrived at the neighborhood, and you let the neighborhood absorb you before you moved toward the thing you came for. She walked like someone who had somewhere to be, but was not in a hurry about it, which is the most invisible way a person can move through a street that is watching everything. The clinic was real. She had checked it in her first week at Al Rashid, not because she knew she would need it, but because she cataloged everything in every district within reasonable distance of the facility. It was a small operation run by a Jordanian physician named Dr. Salam, who worked 6 days a week and accepted walk-ins and had a reputation in the district for not asking questions about how people got the injuries they came to him with. She had his contact information in her phone. She had a reason to be here. She was a medical volunteer checking on supply needs for a nearby partner clinic. It was a reason that was entirely true and could be verified in 30 seconds, and would bore anyone checking it into letting her pass. She used it twice in the first 4 minutes. Once at the corner where 2 men were standing in the particular posture of people whose job is to notice who comes and goes. And once at the entrance to the block where a woman selling bread from a cart looked at her with the assessing eyes of someone who had lived in this district long enough to know which strangers were interesting. Both times the answer satisfied. Both times she moved on. The warehouse was a 3rd building on the left side of the street. She did not look at it directly when she passed it. She looked at the clinic 20 meters beyond it, and she walked to the clinic, and she went inside. Dr. Salam was a compact man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the efficient movements of someone who had learned long ago that time in his profession was non-renewable. He looked up when she came in, assessed her in the way physicians assess people, not just medically but wholly, and said in English, "You are from Al-Rashid." It was not a question. She said, "Yes, I called ahead." He nodded. He had received a call from a contact he trusted 30 minutes earlier. He had been told a woman would come, that she was not a threat, that professional courtesy was appropriate. He had not been told anything else and had not asked for anything else, because that was the arrangement, and it had worked for 4 years. He led her to the back room, which served as both a supply area and, on days when the patient load exceeded the waiting room, an overflow consultation space. She went to the window that looked out onto the alley behind the building. From this angle, she could see the rear access door of the warehouse. She could see the vehicle that had appeared in the satellite image. A panel van, backed up to the loading dock. Engine off, but recently used. She could tell from the heat shimmer above the exhaust pipe, even at this distance. She could also see the man sitting on a crate near the dock door. He was young, maybe mid-20s, and he was not one of the people who had come through Al-Rashid's front entrance that morning. He was different. He was not tactical, not deployed. He was a keeper, and keepers meant there was someone inside worth keeping. She took out her phone. She sent 3 characters to the number that had sent her the satellite image. Those 3 characters were a confirmation code that meant eyes on, target location confirmed, subject likely present. She put the phone away. Dr. Salam appeared in the doorway of the back room. He said quietly, "How long do you need?" 12 minutes, she said, maybe less. He nodded and went back to his patients. He was a man who had learned, in this district, that some things were better understood in their outcomes than in their processes. Her phone vibrated, a single word, moving. That meant Holt's team was 4 minutes out. That meant the approach window was now. That meant the keeper by the dock door needed to be managed before the sound of a vehicle in the alley told him something was wrong. She picked up her medical bag. She walked out the clinic's back door into the alley. She walked toward the warehouse loading dock with the unhurried confidence of someone who had a reason to be there. Because confidence was the only armor that worked in an alley like this one. And she had never had trouble with confidence. The keeper saw her at 30 feet. He stood up. He was young. She had assessed that from the window and confirmed it now. Maybe 23, with the tight shoulders of someone maintaining alertness he had been trained to maintain, but had been maintaining for a long time and was tired of. He said something in Arabic, a challenge. "Who are you? Or what do you want? Or both?" She answered in Arabic. She was from the clinic. There had been a report of an injured man at this location. She had her medical bag. She was a volunteer. She had ID. She was already reaching into her bag with the calm of someone retrieving exactly what they said they were retrieving. He hesitated. That was the tell. He hesitated instead of escalating, which meant he was not fully committed, which meant somewhere in the chain above him, someone had told him to maintain a low profile, and that instruction was now in conflict with his instinct to respond to an unknown. The conflict bought her 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough. She did not hurt him badly. That was intentional. He went down controlled, and she caught his weight with one arm and lowered him against the crate and checked his pulse with the automatic efficiency of a person who had just done something with one set of skills and was now applying another set to the same problem. Pulse strong. He would wake up with a headache and a confusion about the sequence of events, and nothing more serious than that. She tried the dock door. It was not locked. The keeper had been the lock. She went inside. The inside of the warehouse was not dark, and it was not large, and it did not smell of anything except dust and machine oil and the particular staleness of a space that has been inhabited recently by people who are not its intended occupants. She moved through it quickly, listening, orienting by sound the way she had been taught to orient when sight was unreliable. She heard him before she found him, a sound that was barely a sound, the controlled, deliberate breathing of someone who had been in a bad situation long enough to understand that panic was a luxury they could not afford, and had made the decision to breathe through it instead. He was in the back corner of the warehouse's secondary room, wrists bound with zip ties to a support post, sitting on the floor with his knees up and his head back against the post and his eyes closed. He was alive. He was awake. He was, by any assessment she could make in the first 4 seconds of seeing him, physically intact. No visible serious injuries, no signs of the specific kind of deterioration that told you a person had been treated in ways that left marks deeper than the surface. He heard her footsteps, and his eyes came open, and his whole body went rigid with the animal alertness of someone for whom unexpected footsteps had never meant anything good. She said his name. Tariq. He stared at her. She was a woman in civilian clothes with a medical bag and calm eyes, and she had said his name, and nothing about her read like the people he had been around for 4 months. Youssef, she said, your brother sent people. His face broke. Not dramatically, not in the way it happens in stories, just quietly, the way a thing that has been held together under enormous pressure releases when the pressure is suddenly removed. All at once and irreversibly. He pressed his mouth together hard, and his eyes filled, and he said, his voice rough with disuse, and something much heavier than disuse. He is okay? Youssef is okay? He is safe, she said. She was already cutting the zip ties with a small tool from her bag. He is being looked after. He did not. I told him not to. Tariq's voice broke again. I told him whatever they asked him to do not do it. I told him just leave me. I told him. He could not leave you, she said, simply, without sentiment. Because sentiment was not what this moment needed. What it needed was the truth, and the truth was simple. He is your brother. He could not leave you. The zip ties came apart. She helped him to his feet. His legs were unsteady in the way that legs get after long periods of restricted movement, and she put her hand under his arm and held his weight without comment while he found his balance. Outside, she heard the vehicle. One vehicle, moving carefully, which meant Holt's team had come in without the kind of approach that announces itself. She heard the dock door. She heard Reyes's voice. Not words, just the tone, the clipped, efficient tone that meant the outer perimeter was clear and they were coming in. Holt came through the inner door 30 seconds after she had Tariq on his feet. He saw her. He saw Tariq. He stood in the doorway for 1 full second, and something moved through his face that he did not manage to keep off it. Something that was not just professional relief, but personal relief. The kind that belongs specifically to people who told someone they would come back and need to see that the person came back. He said, "You cut it close." She said, 12 minutes. I said maybe less. He looked at Tariq. He took in the zip tie marks on his wrists, the 4 months in his face, the way he was standing, upright, present, himself, which were the 3 things that mattered. Holt said, "Can you walk?" Tariq said, "Yes." He said it with the specific firmness of a man who would walk through whatever needed walking through to get to the other side of this day. "Then let us go," Holt said. They were almost at the dock door when her phone went off. Not a message, a call. The number was Trace's. She answered. He said without preamble, "The communications breach. The 11 minutes of live FOB traffic. Our analysts have been working it since this morning." A pause. Castillo, the traffic that went across the compromise relay. It was not random FOB communications. Someone on the inside flagged specific channels to run through the relay during those 11 minutes. The traffic that was captured was targeted. She stopped walking. Tariq and Holt were 3 steps ahead of her, and Holt turned at the change in her footsteps and looked at her face and stopped too. Which channels, she said. Extraction protocols, Trace said. Specifically, the updated extraction protocols for the cover patient. The route, the safe house, the timeline. He paused. Whoever managed the inside access to this operation was not just after the patient in room 309. They wanted to know where he was going after we moved him. Farhan moved him before the breach, she said. Before 7. The breach was at 0741. Farhan moved him to a staging location, Trace said, not directly to the safe house. The final transfer was scheduled for 1400 today. Another pause. If those extraction protocols were captured and decoded, whoever has them knows where he will be at 1400. She looked at her watch. It was 11:47. 2 hours and 13 minutes. Trace, she said, who flagged the channels. We are still working that. Trace, she said his name the way she said things that needed to be received completely. Who had access to those specific channel configurations? Give me the list. A pause. She could hear him making a decision. 4 people, he said. Myself, Farhan, the communications officer on the roof, who was not a communications officer, we established that this morning, and 1 other. He stopped. She waited. The 4th person on the access list, Trace said, was added 6 weeks ago, under a clearance extension that was processed through my office, but that I did not personally authorize. Another pause, and in this one she could hear something that was not typical Trace. Something that was the sound of a commanding officer who has found a thread in his own operation that he does not want to pull but cannot leave alone. The name on the extension is a cover designation, but the access pattern matches someone who has been in and out of Al-Rashid for the past 2 months. He said the name. She stood in the warehouse doorway in the gray zone district with Tariq at her side and Holt 3 feet away watching her face, and Reyes outside by the vehicle, and the whole morning behind her, and she heard the name and understood. She said, he is still at the facility. Yes, Trace said, you need to hold him there. Already in progress. But Castillo, we need you back here. The debrief on the channel access, the cover patient's extraction, all of it needs to be restructured in the next 2 hours. And you are carrying half the operational picture in your head right now. I know, she said. I am on my way. She hung up. She looked at Holt. He had caught enough from her side of the call to have assembled a partial picture and was waiting for her to fill the rest in. She said, the communications breach was not just opportunistic. Someone on the approved access list flagged the extraction protocols to run through the compromise relay deliberately. We have a second inside source. Not Youssef. Someone with clearance. Holt's jaw tightened. Who? I will tell you in the vehicle, she said. We need to move. They moved. In the vehicle, with Tariq in the back seat beside her, and Holt in the front, and Reyes driving with the focused silence of a man who has learned that the people behind him need to be able to talk. She told Holt the name. She watched him receive it. She watched his face do what it did. The controlled absorption, the rapid reassessment of everything the name touched, and she watched it arrive at the same place she had arrived at when Trace said it. The place where the shape of the morning reorganized itself one final time into a form that was complete and terrible and made a specific kind of sense. Holt said, he was in the debrief room. Yes, she said. He heard everything we said about the cover patient, about Youssef, about the warehouse. Yes. He did not know we were coming here. No, he heard warehouse location but not the specific address. Youssef gave that to me and Reyes in the basement, and it was not transmitted on any channel. She paused. But he heard the extraction protocol channel information before the breach was identified, and he has been passing it up for 2 hours. To whoever is running this operation. Yes, she looked out the window. The city was still moving, still ordinary, still indifferent. The attack on Al-Rashid this morning was a 3-part operation. Part 1, the 6 men in the corridors, was a distraction and an attempt on the targeted patients. Part 2, the roof team, was the communications breach to capture the extraction protocols. Part 3, she paused. Part 3 has not happened yet. It is the interception of the cover patient at 1400, and without the inside source flagging the channels, they would not have the protocol details. Correct, which means the attack this morning did not fully succeed or fully fail. It got them what they actually needed, the extraction route. She looked at Holt. The cover patient's testimony begins in 72 hours. If they cannot stop him before he reaches the proceedings, years of operational work disappear. They will not stop trying. Holt was quiet for a moment. Trace is restructuring the extraction. He is trying to, but restructuring a protocol in 2 hours with a compromised channel and an identified inside source in custody is... She paused. It is possible, but it requires everyone who knows anything about the original protocol to be isolated from communication until the new route is established. She looked at him, which means the person with the most complete operational picture of what happened this morning needs to be back at that facility in the next 40 minutes helping Trace rebuild it from clean. He looked at her. You, he said. Me, she said. They came back through the Al Rashid East entrance at 12:22. Rodriguez was no longer at the door. Someone had finally convinced him to lie down, or he had passed out from the rib pain. The probabilities were roughly equal. The lobby had been largely cleared of emergency personnel and was in the transitional state between incident and aftermath, the stage where the people who respond to crises hand off to the people who document and analyze and prevent the next one. Tariq walked through the east entrance on his own feet, which was what he had said he would do and what he did. He stopped just inside the door. He looked at the lobby, at the damaged front entrance, at the lingering dust, at the signs of what the morning had been. And he stood there for a moment, taking it in with the particular stillness of someone who is understanding for the first time the full scale of what his brother had been part of. "Where is Youssef?" he said. "This way," Holt said, and he took Tariq himself, which Ava noticed, down the corridor toward where the MP unit had set up a temporary holding space. He did not hand him off to a subordinate. He took him himself. She filed that away. Trace was in the communications room on the second floor when she arrived. He had 3 personnel at terminals and a look on his face that she had not seen from him before. Not stress exactly, but the compressed focus of a man who is working against a clock and is fully aware that the clock is not going to negotiate. He looked up when she came in. He said, "Tariq." "Safe," she said, "with Holt." Something in his posture released a fraction. The inside source is in MP custody. He stopped talking when he was taken. He has said 6 words since, all of them unhelpful. "He does not need to talk," she said. She moved to the terminal beside his lead analyst. "The flagged channels. I need to see the access timestamps and the transmission window." She looked at Trace. "If he flagged the channels at a specific time, we can cross-check against his physical location during the incident. If he was not in contact with the outside during those 11 minutes, then someone else received the flag output and transmitted it. We find that transmission point, and we find the external handler." Trace nodded once. "Show her what she needs," he said to the analyst, and moved aside. She worked for 41 minutes. She did not explain what she was doing in real time, because the doing was faster than the explaining, and everyone in the room had the good sense to let her work. What she found in those 41 minutes was not what Trace had expected her to find, and not what she had expected to find, and was, in its way, the last piece of the morning snapping into a position that made the whole structure visible at once. The flagged channel transmission had not gone to an external handler. It had gone to a device inside the building. A device that had been active in the building's internal network for 6 weeks, since the access extension was added. A device that was small enough to have been installed in a maintenance panel without detection and that had been transmitting in short encrypted bursts to an external receiver on a frequency that ran just below the building's standard signal monitoring threshold. The same maintenance panel that Ava had used twice that morning. The panel on the north side of the building with the pressure catch that did not lock properly. She stared at the transmission log for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Youssef did not install this." Trace came and stood beside her. He looked at the log. "The installation date is 6 weeks ago," she said. "Youssef's contact with the operation started 4 months ago, but his access to that specific panel was logged for the first time 8 days ago. Someone else installed this device before Youssef was ever recruited." She looked at Trace. Youssef was not the original inside source. He was the replacement, or the backup. Someone recruited him as a secondary access point after the primary device was already in place. The room was very quiet, which means the operation was running inside this building for 6 weeks before the attack, she said, which means someone who had access 6 weeks ago, who has been inside this building regularly since then, who knew the maintenance panel configuration. She stopped. She looked at the transmission log one more time. Trace, the device installation timestamp, cross-reference it against visitor logs for that date. He was already looking. He pulled the log. He scrolled. He stopped scrolling. He was quiet for 4 seconds, which was a long time for Trace to be quiet. He said the name. A different name from the one he had said on the phone. A name that landed in the room like a stone through a window, sudden and irreversible. It was not a person in custody. It was not a person who had been identified this morning. It was a person who had walked in and out of Al Rashid on a visitor clearance for 6 weeks and had smiled at the staff and asked reasonable questions about the facility's operations, and had filed reports that were professional and unremarkable, and had been, from the first day to this one, something else entirely. Trace made 3 calls in the next 8 minutes. She did not listen to the calls. She was reviewing the transmission data, extracting what was extractable, building the operational picture that needed to be transferred out of her head and into a form that would survive the debrief and the analysis and the proceedings in 72 hours. She worked with the particular focused speed of someone who understands that the value of information degrades the moment the circumstances that created it begin to change. Holt came back into the communications room at 13:10. He looked at the room, at the terminals, at Trace on his 3rd call, at Ava at the terminal. He came and stood beside her. He said, without making it a question, "You found something." "Several somethings," she said. "The morning had more layers than we thought." "When does it stop having layers?" "When the proceedings are done and the source is protected and the people who needed to know what he knows have heard it." She paused. 72 hours, give or take. "And between now and then?" She looked at him. It was the first time in several hours that the space between them had not been filled with a specific operational task. And the absence of the task made the space feel different. Not uncomfortable, just honest. She said, "Between now and then, someone restructures an extraction protocol. Someone processes a custody transfer. And someone tells a 28-year-old man that his brother is sitting in a room down the hall, waiting to see him." Holt looked at her. "That last part." "Yes," she said. "I told Rodriguez I would make sure it was done in a way that a person deserves." "You should be the one to do it," Holt said. "I know," she said. "I will." She walked to the temporary MP holding room at 1322. The MP outside the door looked at her ID, looked at her face, and stepped aside without a word. Inside, Youssef was sitting in a chair at a table, not in restraints. They had assessed him correctly as not a flight risk, with a cup of tea that had gone cold in front of him, in the look of a man who has stopped expecting anything and is simply enduring the time between where he is and whatever comes next. He looked up when the door opened. He had been waiting for someone in a uniform with a form to fill out. She was not that. She was a woman in civilian clothes who had been in his building's basement 4 hours ago and had asked him his brother's name. She sat down across from him. She did not bring paperwork. She did not have a recorder running. She said, "Tariq is safe. He is in the building. He is asking for you." The thing that happened to Yusuf Karim's face in that moment was one of those things that does not translate into language well, because language was built for concepts, and this was something that predated concepts, something that lived in the place between people and could only be witnessed, not described. He put both hands flat on the table and he pressed them down hard, and he looked at the ceiling and he breathed in a way that was the body catching up with something the mind had already received. He said, "He is okay. He walked in on his own feet," she said. "He asked for you before he asked for anything else." Yusuf looked at her. His face was a thing of complicated humanity, guilt and relief, and the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying the consequences of a decision that was wrong for reasons that were not wrong, and who is now being asked to set it down and does not quite know how. "What happens to me?" he said. "There will be a process," she said honestly. "I will not tell you it will be simple, because it will not be. But the people who have your case understand the circumstances. They understand what was done to you and what you gave us and what it cost you." She paused. "I will not make promises I cannot keep, but I can tell you that the people in this building are not the people who do not see the difference between someone who chose this and someone who was forced into it. They see the difference." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You stopped them. This morning, in the building." "We all stopped them," she said. "Your information stopped them. Farhan moving the patient stopped them. Your brother being alive stopped them, because it meant you still had something to fight for." She looked at him. Everyone had a part. He looked at his hands on the table. "You were the nurse," he said. "I saw you once, in the corridor, in the first week. You were checking on the patient in 301. I thought you were just a nurse." "I am a nurse," she said. He looked up at her. "I am also other things," she said. "Most people are." She brought him to Tariq herself. She walked him down the corridor and knocked on the door of the room where Tariq had been placed. A patient room on the second floor. Proper bed, medical check completed. Kowalski stationed outside with the particular expression of a man who has had a long day and is prepared to have a longer one. She opened the door and stepped aside and let Yusuf go in alone, because some things do not need witnesses, and do not need company, and do not need anyone except the people they belong to. She stood in the corridor with Kowalski, and from behind the closed door she could hear nothing except what silence sounds like when it contains two brothers who have spent 4 months on either side of an impossible situation and are now, finally, on the same side of it. Kowalski said, after a moment, "How are you doing?" She looked at him. He was 26, and he had asked the question with genuine curiosity and genuine care, and it caught her slightly off balance because the morning had been long, and the question was simple, and simple things have a way of landing harder than complicated ones after hard days. "I am good," she said. She said it the way she had said it to Tariq hours ago. Not meaning nothing happened, but meaning she was still standing, which was enough. He nodded. He looked at the door. "What he did, Yusuf, it was wrong, but it was also human," she said. "Yeah," he said, "human." They stood in the corridor for another minute. Then she said, "I need to finish the debrief documentation," and pushed off the wall and started walking. At 1742, Commander Trace restructured the extraction protocol from clean. The cover patient was moved at 1815 using a route that had not existed that morning and a timeline that bore no resemblance to anything captured in the compromised channel. He arrived at the safe house at 1851. He was intact. He was ready. In 72 hours, he would sit in a room and say the things he had spent 4 years and an enormous personal cost learning to say. And the people in that room would hear them. and the network that had sent 6 men through the doors of Al-Rashid Military Medical Center on a Tuesday morning would begin the long, irreversible process of coming apart. Holt found her at 1900 in Ward C. She was sitting in the chair beside Tomas's bed, not because Tomas needed medical attention. He had been assessed and cleared, and his chart was in order. She was sitting there because Tomas had asked her to stay for a few minutes, just a few minutes, and tell him what had happened, because he had heard everything from inside the bathroom and understood pieces of it, but not the shape. And she was telling him the shape in the way you tell a young soldier who has been through something. Honestly, without the parts that needed to stay quiet, and with the specific weight of respect that a person earns when they stay in the bathroom with their IV stand and do not open the door until they hear their name and rank. Holt stood in the doorway. Tomas looked up and saw him and gave a small nod, the kind that young soldiers give to senior officers when they are acknowledging their presence without interrupting the thing currently happening. Holt nodded back. He leaned against the doorframe and waited. She finished. She checked Tomas's chart one last time, efficient and automatic. She told him to sleep and mean it. She stood up and came to the doorway. Holt said, "Debrief is done. Trace is satisfied with the documentation." "Good," she said. "The extraction is clean." "I know. Youssef and Tariq have been moved to a secure family housing unit pending the resolution of Youssef's case. Farhan is being briefed on the second inside source and the 6-week device installation. He is—" Holt paused. "He is not taking it well. He trusted someone," she said. "That is hard." "Yes," Holt said, "it is." They walked out of the ward corridor together and into the main second-floor hallway, and the building around them was doing the thing it always did. It was being a hospital. The hum of the generators, lower now, the generator issue resolved. The antiseptic smell, the linoleum under their boots, the night shift nurses beginning their rounds at the far end of the hall, moving with the particular kind of care that people carry when they know the day behind them has been different from other days, but the work in front of them is the same as it always is. She stopped at the north window. The same window. 6:42 this morning, she had stood here counting 11 things wrong. It was 1914 now. The road below was empty. The truck was gone. The rooftop across the street was empty. The morning had happened and been survived, and was now, in the way that mornings eventually become, the past. Holt stood beside her. He said, "What do you count now?" She looked out the window. She looked at the road, the rooftop, the ordinary evening moving through the street below. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Nothing wrong." He looked at her profile. The dark eyes, the composed face. The woman who had walked into this building 22 days ago as a nurse, and had been that entirely, and had also, in a single morning, been everything else she was without ever stopping being the first thing. He said, "When your rotation ends, 3 weeks, almost 2 now," she said, "will you?" He stopped. He was not a man who left sentences unfinished. He finished this one because it needed finishing. "Will you come back?" She looked at him. Something in her face was honest in the way that people are honest when they are tired enough and have been through enough that the management of impression has become too much work to bother with. She said, "I do not know what comes next. Trace will have a conversation with me. It will not be a simple one." She paused. "But if they let me choose—" "If they let you choose," he said. She looked back out the window. "I like this work," she said simply. "Both kinds." She let that sit for a moment. "I am good at both." He looked at her. He said, "You are the best I have ever seen at both." She did not deflect it or diminish it. She received it the way honest things should be received. Directly, completely, with the quiet that means it has been heard. She nodded once. She looked back at the road. They stood at the window for another minute. The generators hummed. The night shift moved through the halls. Somewhere below them, in a building that was still standing because of a morning that had started with a woman at this window reading 11 things wrong and acting on all of them alone, the work continued. It always continued. That was the point of it. That was why it was worth doing. Ava Castillo had come to Al Rashid Military Medical Center as a nurse, and she had been that completely. And she had also been a Marine, and a sniper, and a strategist, and the most dangerous person in the building from the moment she walked through the doors. And not one of those things had ever been in conflict with any of the others, because all of them pointed at the same thing, the same north, the same reason to get up at 5:30 and do rounds, and stand at windows and count what was wrong, and move toward it without hesitation when the moment came. She kept people alive, in whatever way the moment required, with whatever she had, for as long as it took. That was who she was. That was who she had always been. And no matter how many times the world tried to put her in a single category, nurse, soldier, woman, volunteer, she was simply, entirely, and without apology, all of it at once. That was enough. That had always been enough. And on the day that it was not, she would find a way to become more, because that was what she did. And that was what she would always do. And nobody who had been in that building on that Tuesday morning would ever again make the mistake of looking at the person in front of them and deciding, without looking further, that they already knew what they were seeing.